Good morning and welcome to Rose Red Homestead. Today we're going to ask a big question. Do you really need a slow cooker? Actually, that is the question I've been asking myself. You see my lineup right here. From this little tiny baby one right here to one that I just barely purchased right here. These slow cookers came on the market in about 1970, which was the same year that my first child was born. And over the next several years, as I had my children, 6 altogether, then was instructed by my then husband that I needed to go back to work to help support the family. And at that point in time, I needed help with meals. And we called them crock pots, regardless of the brand. It was just crock pot, kind of like Levi's is the catch-all name for jeans, regardless of the brand. And so many of my fellow teachers in the elementary school where I was teaching, we all did crock pot meals and we would exchange recipes. Now, I probably am not what you call a foodie in today's vernacular. I'm just fix it if it's good. I know what I like. If it's not good, I know what I don't like. I was raised in a very large family with not a lot of income. My dad was a university professor and they did not make much money back in those days. And there were 9 children in the household. And so we just ate what mother prepared and what we were lucky to get. And so I grew up on a very plain and general diet. Well, the crock pot fit in just beautifully with what my upbringing was. And so I would just put food in the crock pot in the morning. And by the time I got home from school in mid-afternoon, dinner would be just nearly ready and I'd put the finishing touches on it. So mostly for those years, I just treated it as a convenience and didn't pay much attention to the quality. Of course, now we're much more aware of nutrition than we were way back in those years in the 70s. But nutrition has become the forefront of thinking. So another thing that has happened with these home appliances, these small appliances, is it is almost like there's this huge competition among different units to be the best one that does the most things. And my gosh, it's like now this unit can cook, it can bake, it can braise, it can freeze dry, it can fix dinner, it can feed the dog. And it has always made me wonder just a little bit with all of these multi-purpose things that do a whole ton of things, that what is sacrificed in one area in order to just add another checkbox of things that it does. My own personal preference is I don't mind buying small appliances that have multi-purposes, but for instance, there is a good brand of kitchen equipment now that has just put out a countertop oven that, I mean, it does about 15 different things. It's $1,000 and it's on your countertop. And I'm wondering, okay, what does it do really well and what is just on the borderline? I would much prefer an appliance that just does its thing and does it really, really well. Well, part of that becomes my responsibility as the cook to know and understand what the appliance does. Now, I've always had more than one crock pot, but honestly, I didn't know that I had 4. When I went searching for them, this has been our household one for a few years. I knew I had one out in the trailer. This is the one that I've had for 20 years once we started trailering. And the interesting thing is that this one that has been out in our trailer, I don't believe I have used it more than once or twice. My question is, do you really need a crock pot? Well, do I really need this crock pot? Maybe not. And this little baby over here, it just has an off-on. It doesn't have high-low or anything else. It's either off or it's on. And I have used it for dips and it has worked really well. But these two are the ones that I probably will be focusing on as we go forward. As I ask myself the question, do I really need all of these crock pots? Do I really even need one crock pot? Of course, I started doing some research and reading articles about it. And these were considered one of the first appliances that really helped the housewife with convenience and time. It was a big time saver. I thought we would go over some of the pros and some of the cons that I came up with as I was doing my research, and then we'll talk a little bit about, well, what do we really need? Then we'll talk about slow cooker alternatives. And then I will share with you what I like best about a crock pot. The bottom line is each one of us is going to make our own decision about whether or not we really need a crock pot. But here are some things, especially if you have not yet purchased a crock pot, that you can consider in making your choice. Here are the key reasons why crock pots are really a good idea to have in the kitchen. First of all, they cook at a very low temperature, usually high and low. Some of the more fancy ones, and I do not go into the fancy ones that can do everything. I just want something that does just the standard and let me be the brain instead of it be the brain. But they cook at slow, low temperature. Cook slow, cook low. There are lots and lots of recipes that do very well under those conditions, and we'll talk about those in just a minute. Basically, what happens is the low, slow temperature causes the food and whatever else, the liquid, to steam. The steam rises, collects on the underside of the lid, and then because the lid is colder than the steam condenses into water, back into its liquid from the gas, and it drips back down on the food, basting the food all over again. That's one thing in cooking that we need to realize what is going on in order to decide whether or not a recipe really works. Another very strong pro for having a crock pot is that it tenderizes inexpensive cuts of meat. And this is what really worked for me when I was raising a large family. My first husband was a dentist, so thankfully we could afford groceries, but I've always been so very frugal, and my upbringing was in a household that was always having to watch finances. That's kind of in my DNA to this day. But it tenderizes low cuts of meat because that low, slow cooking, it breaks the connective tissue, and then it makes the meat tender and very flavorful. Then it's the hands-off cooking. You put it in the morning, you have dinner ready in the afternoon. So that's always been a very big draw for crock pots. So once the ingredients are added, you can leave it for several hours and let it do the cooking without any worries at all. It was very convenient for me when I was teaching. I left home in the morning with my children. That's the advantage of being a school teacher. And I was home just shortly after my children got home. As a school teacher, I was able to be home by 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It's also great for large batches. These two are 6-quart. This is a 3-quart. This one is a 3-cup. But I used to get the big tall ones I had that would hold 10 quarts or a lot more than 6 quarts because I was cooking for a big family and it required a lot of food. And so a crock pot was perfect for that. And then there are lots of versatile cooking options. It's great for soups and stews and pot roasts and things like that. But you can also do desserts in them. You can do puddings. You can do sauces. You can do dips. And that's what I use this one mostly for. When I do a queso dip, I put the cheese in here and melt the cheese and then add the salsa to that. And then it keeps it warm all during serving time. So that's really an advantage for that one. Now, another advantage is that you don't ever need to put any extra cooking oil in here. And because the temperature is low and slow and it produces enough moisture that things generally don't stick. And this last one is one that I'm very fond of, is that it cooks very well in a situation where you have electricity, but you don't have a kitchen that is operational. So when we were, for instance, doing the remodeling in our kitchen, or right now when we are up at the cabin, crock pot, in fact, I'm doing a lot of crock pot meals for us up at the cabin. And now when I say up at the cabin, that's on our other channel, Trail Grazers. We have just gained access to quite a nice, very older, very dirty cabin that we are cleaning up and getting ready to make it our bugging out place or our place to go just for relaxation. Lots of projects, if you want to follow us along on that adventure, on our opening YouTube channel page is it's a little round disc about this big around. It says Trail Grazers. You can click on that image and it will take you over to that channel and you can subscribe if you wish. With all of these trendy appliances that claim that they can do just about everything in our kitchen, I think that it is important to home in on, okay, so these are wonderful, but what are the drawbacks? What things might limit what we want to do, because in spite of what the advertising says, crock pots do not solve every cooking problem. And we need to understand that. So first of all, a slow cook will not necessarily make food more flavorful. You know, back in those years when I was just putting, you could even say just throwing food in a pot, letting it cook all day, by the end of the day it tasted like it had just been thrown together. Again, I wasn't that, I didn't pay that much attention. I was so busy and had so much on my mind. In fact, that's pretty much the story of my life. I just, you know, if it was good enough to eat, if it gave enough nutrition to keep us alive, that was okay with me. But I've since changed, and I'll be talking about that in just a minute too. If you cook something for too long, it can lack flavor. Crock pots generally will not allow you to do some of the things that infuse food with more flavor, like to sear it or to caramelize, although I've made a great batch of caramelized onions in a crock pot. That's one thing it does really well. A slow cooker can't cook anything and everything. There are some limitations. Basically, a crock pot is a slow, steamy cook, and there are some things that are just perfect for that, absolutely perfect. A few days ago, we did our traditional St. Patrick's Day corned beef and cabbage meal in this crock pot. I put red potatoes and carrots and onions in the bottom, and then I put a slab of raw corned beef in, added some pickling spices, and it cooked low and slow all day long. Put the cabbage in for the last 45 minutes. It was spectacular. In fact, here are a couple of still shots of that meal from this crock pot. All right, another thing that we need to consider when deciding if we really need a crock pot is most recipes do not call for being cooked all day long. There are a few that work really well, but what I was experiencing back then, even though I didn't recognize it, was that a lot of the meals that I cooked in crock pots, they were way overdone. It had cooked too long. Things were a little bit mushy. We ate it anyway, and we survived that. There are only a few all-day recipes that work like that corned beef and cabbage meal. That was a good one. And crock pots are not super easy to transport. For many, many years, they looked just like this with a lid that is kind of loose to allow some of the steam to escape. But the reason that I bought this one just recently, and this one was not a super expensive, I just don't go in for the top end of machines that claim that they can do all of these things. I just want it to cook a great meal. And I have learned now how to do that. But this one has clamps that will now hold that lid in place. And so when I have a cooked meal or a partially cooked meal that I'm taking up to the cabin, I have a carrier bag for this one as well. And so I can just slip it down in the carrier bag and with the clamps in place know that I'm not going to have any spills as we go over all of those bumpy dirt roads on our way up to the cabin. This one has low and high and keep warm. This one has low and high and keep warm. This one has low and high and keep warm and a timer. And that's the other thing that I bought that was a little bit new than any other crock pot I have ever had. Let's go over a few things that for proper use of these. It is important to understand that these clamps are only for portability and never, ever, ever for cooking. When we are cooking, those clamps need to be off. And why might that be? Well, of course you know the reason. Because if this lid is tightly against the pot, the crock pot itself, then steam may not be able to escape. Now, my lid has, as do many crock pots, my lid has a little hole right there. That is a steam escape. It would be okay, but I would never cook with the clamps in place, just simply because anytime we're building up pressure in a pot that is not a pressure pot, that can be a little bit dangerous. So we just need to be sure that we never cook with clamps in place if your crock pot has clamps. Always put it on a heat-resistant flat surface. Don't put it on a surface that is tilted a little bit. It should be a flat surface. Before you ever put any food in there, check for cracks in the crock, the ceramic crock. Make sure that there's no cracks or anything like that. And be sure that you do the right amount of food for the size of your crock pot. If the recipe says a 6 quart, then use a 6 quart. If it says for a 10 quart, don't try to put the recipe in a 6 quart crock pot. It's always a best idea to defrost food before you put it in, even though some recipes say that you can add the frozen food. A lot of recipes will tell you how long to cook it on low, how long to cook it on high. I'm going to tell you what I do, which is a little bit different there. Here are some alternatives instead of these crock pots that you could use if you just don't want to get into crock pot cooking. First of all, ceramic Dutch ovens do really great. You can put those in a very slow oven, a low temperature oven, and achieve the low and slow cooking that you can achieve in a crock pot. Whether or not you want to leave your oven going with you not at home is a choice that you may want to think about what might be the safest alternative there. And then you can also use your stovetop with great care. You have to be home and monitoring that if you're going to be cooking something low and slow. You don't want all of the liquid to boil out and let the food burn, for instance. And then another alternative, which I have used, and I'm sure many of you used as well, are the Instant Pot type cookers, the multi-cookers. Those also can do pretty much the same thing that a crock pot can do to a degree. To summarize everything, you can save money by using a crock pot, fixing your own meals, using less expensive cuts of meat. They are very, very convenient. That is a great point. And they are energy efficient, which I just love. That fits into our lifestyle. They are limited to recipes that require wet and steamy cooking, so know your recipe. And then the alternatives, there are alternatives that we've just talked about that can produce better texture and better flavor. Now, here I like crock pots, so of course I'm going to keep. I'm probably going to ditch this one. I like this one. I've used this one a lot. I will be definitely keeping these two. This one I don't need anymore, so I probably will find someone in our area who can use this because I don't need this one anymore. I really like two things about crock pots. The things that I like best are the unattended cooking. When we're up at the cabin doing projects, I don't want to be fussing over food. Having a pot that will have dinner ready for us when we're ready for dinner is a wonderful advantage for me. And then the other thing is the energy efficiency where we can use them at the cabin. Now, here's what I have learned. Since I have been retired, I have tried to improve my cooking skills. I don't just dump food and head to the mall anymore. Well, I never did that anyway, but I just don't do that anymore. There are little nuances here. When I try a new recipe that I usually get on the internet, I pay close attention to the ingredients, and I also pay close attention to what the suggested, how many hours on low or how many hours on high. But I don't pay any attention to those anymore because I'm now at home when my crock pot is going most of the time, or at the cabin and with the crock pot going right there at the cabin. And so I monitor the food just a little bit better, and I have been quite surprised at how much the flavor has improved. For instance, with the chicken wings that we have recently done in our crock pot up at the cabin, I put them on low for 2 hours, even though the recipe said this many hours on low or this many hours on high. I did a combination. I started them off on low for 2 hours, and then I bumped it up to high and did high for another hour and 15 minutes, and they were perfect. Also, being home and attending the crock pot as the food is cooking, checking on it once in a while, has made a huge difference in the outcome. So I'm now all about trying to produce more flavor and saving the nutrition as well. So I'm more mindful of how these things cook. I'm looking forward to getting back into more crock pot cooking, especially now with involving our trips up to the cabin. We're going to be putting some crock pot recipes in our videos. Most of them will be on Trail Grazers. We send out a weekly note, a weekly programming note. I try to remember to do it every Sunday on what is happening on both channels in the same note. And so you can watch for crock pot recipes that we're doing up at the cabin. And then you can check those out over on the other channel if you also are interested in doing some really delicious and nutritious crock pot recipes. I hope that this information has been helpful, and above all, we want to be safe and we want to serve good food to our families. Thank you so very much for being with us in this video today, and we will see you very soon for more.